Hello and welcome to the Eating Disorder Therapist podcast. I'm Harriet Frew, eating disorder therapist, here to support you in overcoming disordered eating and finding peace with food. So thank you so much for listening today. Now today I want to give you a bit of a recovery motivation boost as we go into 2026 to help you stop all or nothing thinking, to really see recovery as a process and to engage with the long game and to believe that recovery is possible. Now, I believe myself, someone who's been recovered now for a very long time, but having struggled with bulimia in my teens and 20s for almost 10 years, I always believed that recovery was possible. I always held on to hope. And I believe that that's one of the things that enabled me to get out of the eating disorder. And it hasn't been all roses and smooth sailing, but I'm so glad that I have come out of the eating disorder. I'm on the other side, so I can support you today. And however stuck you are feeling right now, please realize that recovery is possible. So just to say as well, if you would like to work with me one-to-one, I will be taking on more clients in the new year, as we are in the new year now, but please do get in touch. You can email me at harriet.frew@gmail.com. I work with all eating disorders, all disordered eating. Also as well, if you've been taking GLP-1 drugs and you're really struggling with your eating, again, no shame with this. This is a problem I'm seeing more and more in the therapy room, people of all shapes and sizes. So please just do reach out whatever your struggle with food. Okay, and also to mention as well that my Food Freedom app is live as well. So if you're interested in that, there's a link in the show notes. And if you're reading this on Substack, you can see the link here. Okay, so let's dive in today. So on the eating disorder recovery road, your motivation for change will ebb and flow. And sadly, it's not a beautiful linear journey with marked destination, posts, and defined milestones. Wouldn't it be wonderful if it was? Prochaska and De Clementi's Cycle of Change offers a model for explaining the precarious change road with its inevitable ambivalence and turbulence. The model is not only for eating disorder recovery, but can be applied to a myriad of transformation processes. So if you're on Substack, you'll be able to see a little diagram of the model. If you are listening to the podcast, what I'd encourage you to do is just put into Google Cycle of Change, the stages of change model, and it will come up and you can have a little look at it actually, or you can just go to my Substack and look at the link there. But basically it just describes the process of change, which I'm going to talk you through as being a stepped process where it's very normal to go forwards and backwards and for it to be a bit messy and imperfect, but it's all part of the learning process. Okay, so I'm going to talk as well a bit about my own recovery journey when I reflect on the different stages. So in the cycle of change, you start in pre-contemplation. Now, pre-contemplation is kind of the place where you don't really think you have a problem. It's almost like those golden honeymoon early days of the eating disorder where other people around you might say to you, oh, I'm a bit worried about you. You seem to have lost quite a lot of weight, or you seem to be a bit you've changed your relationship with food. Is everything okay? And you're like, yeah, I'm fine. Everything's great. I'm just being really healthy. I'm on it. Pre-contemplation is often the honeymoon phase. And this is often the problem with eating disorders because often people are struggling for quite a long time before they even realize they are. And they might have been in this pre-contemplative stage for quite a while before they ever seek help. So let's dive in a bit more to what pre-contemplation is about. So if I talk about my own story, I distinctly remember the early days of restrictive eating. It felt effortless, easy, and gratifying at the beginning. I loved it. I just really thought, oh my goodness, I love all these food rules, this discipline. I'm losing weight. It's kind of incremental weight loss every week. It's really satisfying. My clothes are starting to feel looser, hanging off me. And people are asking me, how am I doing it? The compliments are flooding in. And I remember at the beginning thinking, why? Why did it take me so long to understand this process? What's all this fuss around self-control and eating? I really felt quite superhuman and invincible. And a lot of people will describe this in those early days of their eating disorder. And I think this is a tricky old phase in a way because it feels so seductive that we're often trying to get back to that early phase because it felt like everything was so wonderful then. But of course, it wasn't really sustainable, but it feels like it was because it kind of was in the very early stages. Now, I know for me, I felt superhuman and invincible until suddenly I didn't. Suddenly, I don't know kind of when it happened, but it kind of creeps in, doesn't it? For one day, you're kind of feeling like this is good. I'm kind of on it. I'm enjoying it. I feel good. Everything's going well. And then suddenly, the restriction starts to turn into toil and labor. It becomes harder, okay? I remember being preoccupied with food, and I just remember spending time with my boyfriend at the time and just could not wait until the next meal, even though I wouldn't allow myself to eat, but it was just completely distracting. I couldn't really be present in the moment. I was just thinking about when I was going to be finally allowed to eat. And then, of course, I would hardly eat anything. And I remember the cold. I remember the kind of golden phase of my eating disorder was in the summer. And I remember going into the autumn weather and it just felt freezing. I just remember it felt like chilly midwinter to my thinner body. Just felt awful, horribly, horribly cold. So this is very normal. I think many of my clients have described this. On the eating disorder recovery road, there's usually the golden honeymoon period of early dieting and body manipulation. You feel you found the magic pill for controlling your eating, you're losing weight. And of course, it's not an overnight leap into eating disorder territories. Rather, insidiously, you're creeping into those obsessive territories with food. And what initially felt empowering now feels anxiety provoking. So suddenly you're constantly preoccupied with scale weights and calories. You feel freezing cold. Other people start to notice and comment on your eating or changing physique. Now, at this point, as with me, I felt there's nothing really that wrong. I genuinely felt I was okay. I felt, I'm leading my best life, being healthy, sort of rolling my eyes at people's comments, dismissing them, thinking they're just jealous. They don't have the willpower that I have. That's all pre-contemplation, okay? But then we move to contemplation. Contemplation is when we start to realize, maybe I do have a problem, but we also think, I don't think I'm ready to make any changes yet. Thank you very much. Don't come near me and mention the word change. Now, when I had bulimia, I was desperate for someone to remove the binge and purge cycle from my life. I detested the habit with a vengeance. Whereas restriction felt good, pure, worthy, the binge purge cycle felt disgusting and shameful. So my perception of recovery in those early days is I just wanted to return to the early days of my eating disorder where I rigidly controlled my eating with iron rod discipline. And of course, that's not really recovery. That's just restrictive eating disorder. But was I truly ready for recovery and food freedom? Probably not in the early days. In fact, I wanted my body to stay smaller, and I was adamant that regular healthy eating was not for me. And as much as I loathed aspects of the eating disorder, it was something as well that was mine and mine alone. No one else had control over my eating. And it was a secretive world to escape to in a dissociated bubble of protection away from real life. Any stress or discomfort could be blanked over with eating, numbing my emotions or binging, or starving. And the thought of losing this coping was terrifying and uncertain. Who would I be without it? What could I do with all these overwhelming and chaotic emotions? How was I going to deal with them? How would I survive in the world? So I was deeply ambivalent and contemplative about change. So you may relate. You may be in this place now where you recognize that your initial healthy eating, calorie restriction, clean eating has become quite a toxic thing. And maybe it doesn't feel so gratifying anymore as you're now experiencing out of control eating as a backlash to the hunger, but it's a habit and something that feels safe and known. And you value the glimmers of appreciation when people note your weight change, and the focus on food is a welcome distraction from other life stresses. So maybe you feel completely conflicted and torn in your psyche. You love and hate the food preoccupation in equal measure. And perhaps you can't imagine relinquishing the control and returning to your old ways. But Your life is now deeply compromised by food rules, hunger, and resisting the urge to overeat. And your world has shrunk along with your body, and your days are overtaken with relentless routines. Change feels terrifying. What to do? So I think, again, this is a really important part of the whole process of change, just to really acknowledge your ambivalence. Do not shame yourself for your ambivalence. Understand your eating disorder as a coping strategy. Understand that it's giving you certain things and it's taking away certain things. And by really acknowledge and sitting in that ambivalence and recognizing the two sides of the coin, the paradox is actually that it will give space and curiosity and openness and room for thought around possible change. Whereas if you're trying to force yourself into change, if you are trying to do what other people are telling you what to do, rather than coming back to yourself and really acknowledging, how is this eating disorder serving me now? That is the way that you are going to bring about powerful change that's initiated from within. Trying to do it for someone else or following a kind of rigid plan that doesn't really make sense to you, just focusing on behavioral change without really understanding the psychology, that's probably not going to get you to the place that you need to go. Okay, so the next stage is determination/preparation. So depending on which cycle of change, which version of the cycle of change that you look at, sometimes this stage is called preparation, sometimes it's called determination. I probably would refer to it more as preparation. That just sits more comfortably with my understanding of this phase. It's when you're starting to consider change. You're moving from that contemplative place, but you're not really ready quite yet to take action. But you're thinking about, okay, well, if I was going to take action, what would need to be in place? What sort of mindset, what sort of people, what sort of environment? You're starting to really think about all these things. I know for myself, in the first 2 years of my eating disorder, I had no desire for change. It was my safety net, it was my life raft. Do not tell me to change. But then something shifted. I did want to change, but I didn't know how. And back in the dark ages of the late 1990s, there was really very little eating disorder help or understanding available. So what I tried to do when I was trying to change and heal my eating disorder, I just tried to muscle my way through with willpower and iron rod motivation. Now, predictably, this would start with an optimistic success phase, but which would ultimately be too rigid to sustain. And in hindsight, when I look back, I wasn't really fully embracing recovery. I was just trying to be very restrictive on my good days and trying to fight off the binges with intense restraint. But then, of course, the inevitable binge would follow after a few good days because I was kind of hungry, all that tension had built up. And then the binges would come then with ferocious intensity and a turbulent loss of control. So I really felt like the pendulum was swinging from one side to the other. And it was a few years later that I understood more fully what I needed to have in place to support change. And some of these things included things like time and space to focus on recovery without trying to juggle 100 life plates. Now, I know when I was doing my master's in London and I was kind of trying to focus on recovery at that point, but I was just juggling a lot of different things at that point in my life. And when I look back, I can really see why my recovery attempts weren't that successful. And I was also drinking quite a lot of alcohol at that stage. I mean, for me, I've never had a problem with alcohol, but alcohol used to definitely fuel my eating disorder. And it also used to really impact my emotional regulation. So I was drinking quite a bit there. It was like a time of my life where alcohol was very much part of just my social life, my day-to-day living. And that had a huge impact on my ability to recover when I look back. If you'd asked me at the time about that, I probably would have been very defensive about that and, would have not been very open to conversations. But what really helped me is when I finished my master's in London, I moved back to Cambridge. I was doing a sort of temporary job. I was actually back at home temporarily. There was pros and cons of that. But that period of my life, it really gave me a lot of stability and peace and less pressure. So my life opened up where I had time and space to focus on recovery without trying to juggle 100 life plates. I also started drinking less. Also, I had removed myself from some difficult environments that I was in London with toxic relationships. Again, going home wasn't exactly the best environment for recovery, but I guess there was some safety and some predictability in that. And also, I was quite well connected with my friends. And then also, when I moved back to Cambridge after being in London, I sought out some counselling. Now, back then, there wasn't really specific eating disorder therapy available, but I had some general counselling, and that was hugely beneficial because for the first time, I started to really talk about the roots of the problem. I started to really explore why I had developed an eating disorder, why I've been struggling with my mental health, doing all the things. That was so helpful. So think about from your own perspective, are you moving from contemplation into a place of preparation for change? Perhaps you've decided that something needs to change and you can't stay in this limbo of dysfunctional food coping any longer. And maybe you're mentally preparing for the recovery journey ahead. You begin to absorb resources, educate yourself, maybe seek out professional support. You get inspired by others who've walked the journey before and seem happy at the end posts. And you start to prioritize things that will help you on this road ahead. So you garner your support network together and you prioritize time and effort towards your healing focus. And you're still fearful of change, but the fear of not changing is also prominent and pushes you on. So I think it's really important just to say that recovery from an eating disorder is not going to therapy 1 hour a week, sadly. That may be part of it, but it's almost a life overhaul, and it does take time, it does take effort, it does take focus. And for that to happen, it does mean that your life has to be a little bit calmer, maybe your environment has to be a bit more supportive. You have to make time and effort to focus on recovery. It's not just going to happen, because I guess the work ultimately has to come from you. Other people can support and guide you and be along the path with you, but you are the one that's going to need to do the work. And that is empowering, but it also can feel very, very scary. But you'll be amazed at how much you can change when you really recognize and acknowledge and take responsibility for the fact that you have the power within you, and you can start to direct your time and energy more towards recovery. Okay, you do not realize how powerful you are. The next stage is action. So for me, regular eating more, and having some structure and stability truly transformed my relationship with food. Now, of course, regular eating alone will not cure an eating disorder, but it will place a rock solid foundation at your recovery base. You will feel calmer and less anxious. You're not going to be hungry all the time. Your concentration will improve, and your irritability and low mood will decrease. And you'll have access to your emotional world again, rather than being distracted and living constantly in your head. Now, this is not easy work. Body image can be challenging, and buried emotions can initially erupt like volcanoes. It can feel like a really messy, horrible time where one moment you're having a complete meltdown and crying, and then another moment you're laughing with your friend in a way that you haven't been able to laugh in a long time because you've been so starving. So it's a messy, difficult time, but it's okay. You will get through this. It's an important part of the process. So the way out is through, and you're doing the work here, actually being in touch with your emotions, doing the regular eating. This is all part of it. And you can learn to regulate your emotions. You can learn to build solid self-worth. You can also become more accepting of your body, and you can create that internal worth as well, rather than relying on your body having to be a certain number to lift your mood and esteem. So maybe you're listening and you're in this phase now. Maybe you're doing the do, you're eating more, you're reversing restriction, you're addressing other disordered eating patterns. Maybe you're recognizing emotional triggers and possibly getting some therapy or coaching support. And maybe you're talking openly to trusted people, and you're undoing years of thinking and entrenched beliefs. You're tapping into your emotions and feeling things intensely. It's messy, it's sad, and it's complicated, but it can also be really joyful, exciting, liberating, and you're going to rise and fall on the emotional recovery roller coaster daily, but that is okay. It's part of the process. Okay, Next stage of the Procrustes and De Clementi's cycle of change is relapse. Okay, now I know for myself, I relapsed many times in my recovery, but the overall trajectory was incrementally 1% better, probably week by week, maybe sometimes 0.5%. Now, occasionally, I'd be completely catapulted back into a very dark place with Christmas or alcohol-fueled binges or family drama that would trigger old patterns. So sometimes I would just go completely back to the bottom of the well. I would descend into the pit for a period, but I would emerge again. Like the phoenix, determined to put one step in front of the other. And I knew in my body, I knew that I would recover. I had no idea how, and I was in some very dark places, but I really made that decision that bulimia was a temporary position for me. It was not going to be my life. So I would just really encourage you as well, hold on to that belief that you can recover, because life will open up for you and will show you the way. And I know that sounds really kind of woo-woo, but it's true. Lapses or blipses on the recovery road are inevitable, and it sometimes feels like one step forward and 2 steps back. You find yourself at a challenging crossroads time and time again to go back to restriction, or to walk the road less traveled. The eating disorder road, if it's seductive and nostalgic at times, it pulls you back many times. I sometimes think you have to make that decision to recover again and again and again and again and again. You'll be at that crossroads where the eating disorder is just pulling you back in, and you sort of think, I just want to do it one more time. I'm going to do it really properly this time. Don't do it. Okay? But you're going to have these seductive thoughts. That's normal. It's part of the process. It doesn't mean that you're recovering wrong. Okay? It's all part of the process. But what you'll start to do as well is you start to identify your lapse triggers and you recover faster. Your self-awareness is increasing, you're feeling more resilient by the day. And although a lapse can temporarily spiral you out of control, and you feel catapulted to the bottom of the deep, dark well again. Okay. Next phase, maintenance. Okay. So sometimes in some of the cycles as well, you get maintenance coming straight after action. In the version I've got, it's got maintenance coming after relapse. But I guess the really important part of this is that in a way, it doesn't really matter exactly which stage follows which stage, because in the cycle of change, you will go round and round and round the cycle many times before you come out and exit it completely. So let's talk more about maintenance. So the maintenance phase was a mixed bag for me. It felt like Groundhog Day sometimes, as you repeat the helpful cycles again and again until one day they become second nature. At the beginning, it's like when you learn to drive a car. At the beginning, it's all really clunky and you have to think about it all. And then one day you suddenly think, oh my goodness, I've just driven from A to B and I can't remember how I did it. And that's a bit like recovery. Now, when I was in maintenance, I would still revert to the other stages at times when life hit me with overwhelm, but it became the familiar and my new normal as the months progressed. So with maintenance, you're gaining some stability and momentum with recovery at last, and the recovered place feels like a new normal. It feels gently more steady and secure by the day. Now you must repeat the new ways of being again and again and again and again, and your emotional muscles are developing by the day, along with your resilience and a greater sense of freedom. Okay, it's a really important point next. You will go around the cycle of change many times, okay? And people come into therapy sometimes and they think, okay, this is going to be the last time. After my appointment with you, Harry, I'm never going to binge again. I'm never going to purge again. I'm never going to chew and spit again. I'm never going to restrict again. Yeah, I mean, that's a very unrealistic outcome. I'm not saying that is not possible for someone on this planet, but actually just expecting yourself to do that, you're kind of setting yourself up to not win at recovery. Okay, so in eating disorder recovery, you will circle around the cycle of change many times before you exit it, and it can be an excruciatingly frustrating and painfully difficult process, but it's necessary and a chance to understand yourself better and to create a robust toolbox to avoid going back again. So every time you have a little lapse or a blip, just see it as like, this is a great learning opportunity. What can I learn from this? And embrace it with curiosity and compassion. Do not beat yourself with a stick. That's what you will want to do. Okay, so let's just talk briefly now about 7 ways to really increase your recovery motivation as you're going into 2026. So, number 1, Really accept your ambivalence around change. Okay, accept where you're at now. Accept that ambivalence, being in two minds about change, is normal. The eating disorder is a coping strategy and is serving you a purpose as being a life raft and survival strategy. So be really compassionate and understanding with yourself about this. Be curious about how is it helping you manage, what is truly underneath the coping. And there'll be so much to explore when you bravely dive down this rabbit hole. And the great thing is you can learn healthier and more soul nourishing ways to go forward. So if you realize, for example, this eating disorder is making my self-esteem a bit better because when I'm thinner, I feel, people validate me more. If you recognize my eating disorder is a way to distract from difficult emotions, if you recognize like my eating disorder has become my identity, now you can solve these problems with much more healthy and constructive ways of coping. You can boost your self-worth and feel better without having to chase thinness. You can start to regulate and manage your emotions in a much more healthy way rather than distracting yourself from them by numbing or starving. And you can start to create an identity which has so much more meaning and value and purpose than trying to base your identity around the size of your body. Okay, so accept your ambivalence. It's part of the process. And actually, the great thing is when you accept your ambivalence, it opens up space for the possibility of change rather than trying to beat yourself with a stick into why can't I just change? Okay. Number 2, your purpose. Okay. So do that zoom out thing, the zoom out when we look down on ourselves and we realize I am this human on this world, in this world having this experience. And actually we remember we're not put on this earth to get smaller, to shrink our bodies. Okay. This isn't the path to fulfillment, to happiness. Now, I know the culture will tell you otherwise, but, if you could interview some of the thinnest people on the planet at the moment that are maybe getting a lot of external validation in the news for how they look, if you could have a real one-to-one, heart-to-heart with these people and ask them, has this brought you the happiness that you're desiring? I don't think you're going to find that it has, okay? So you have talents, passions, purpose, and loves that light you up and make you shine brightly. So you need to really discover these maybe for the very first time. Now, maybe in your childhood, you were in an environment where you were overlooked. Maybe your parents were busy dealing with their own stresses. Maybe there was life traumas, dramas going on. Maybe for whatever reason, even if people were doing the best they could at the time and they loved you, they weren't really able to help kind of water you like a little plant and help you to kind of grow and blossom and be nurtured. So maybe you have never really had chance to explore who you are, to be in touch with your needs, your wants, your desires. So you might need to be discovering these for the very first time. And you can think about as well, what did you used to love to do before you had the eating disorder? Often if we look back to our younger selves, particularly kind of between the ages of about 8 and 11, is often a good window into what did we really love to do before the world was conditioned us so much and before we got on that whole academic kind of train that happens at secondary school. Now, of course, that may not be true for everyone. If you had a lot going on in your life or at home in those early years, maybe you didn't have the kind of freedom and chance to really find out who you were at that young age. But for some people, that can be a good window in. Another thing to think about as well is if you knew that your life was going to end in a few weeks' time, or when you're an old person and you're looking back on your life, what is going to have been really important to you? Because that will help you to shine a light on where you place value, what your true values are, what your kind of passions are, how you want to be spending your time. And I guess that will help open up possibilities and hope and joy and purpose and things to, like a lighthouse on the shore, to bring you into the harbour, into the safe place of recovery. Because you don't want to think about recovery as just about eating more, gaining weight. It needs to be much more about reconnecting with yourself. Okay, number 3, trauma. Now, maybe you've experienced trauma, loss, toxicity, betrayal, bullying, all the things. And I think life can be incredibly tough and challenging. You may feel broken and disconnected from yourself. Now, I think whatever you have been through and however broken and disconnected you feel from yourself right now, just know that healing is possible for you, okay? And if you look around at people in the world, some of the people that are making the most profound difference in the world are people that have been through some really harsh times. Because of when you go through really harsh times, you have to dig really deep. You have to do a lot of work on yourself where, you know, compared to perhaps someone who has had a bit of an easier time, just doesn't have to go to those places. Through your different experiences one day, although it may not feel it right now, your greatest pain will be a memory, and it will be an integral part of your life tapestry. You know, it will inform things going forward. You know, it might really, have a big influence on how your life path develops. Now, this can feel a long way off. I think all you've got to focus on is really just taking the next first step forward. And there are many routes to healing, okay? People heal through all kinds of things. Sometimes people go to therapy. Sometimes people have a coach. Sometimes people do yoga. Sometimes people do a lot of personal work themselves. Some people go off to South America and, take plant medicine. You know, I'm not advocating any particular route here, but I'm just saying that there are multiple ways to recover, and your path will be an individual path to healing. And I guess I would just encourage you really to take a step forward towards things that make sense to you. Okay, there is not one way to recover. But, you know, certain people's voices may stand out to you more. You know, maybe you're someone who enjoys kind of movement in a healthy way, and actually for you, somatic practices might be better. Or, you know, there can be so many different ways to recover. There is not a one size fits all. So I think as well, sometimes if you've been sort of pushed through the NHS system, if you've had an eating disorder from when you've been quite young, again, sometimes this can be, not always, but quite a negative experience sometimes, because of you have felt very sort of done to with your treatment rather than feeling empowered. But I would just encourage you as well, whatever you've been through in the past, you can decide to get in the driving seat of your recovery and decide that you want to decide what's working for you, and you don't have to do what other people are telling you to do. And I'm not encouraging any kind of self-harm and kind of rebellion against treatment when you're in a really difficult place, because, you know, sometimes if we're really unwell, we do need to go into hospital, or we need to kind of have those more kind of rigid constructs of support around us. But there are many ways to recover. I would really encourage you to get quiet, listen to your heart, and follow the path that feels most right for you. Okay, number 4, your future self. So your future self is unlikely to place such high value on weight or body shape as parameters of self-worth. Instead, they will look back wistfully at the decades past, recalling experiences, connections, adventures, and vivid, joyful moments. So live today with your future self in mind. And I think what's a real reality is people coming out of an eating disorder often experience so much grief, just realizing in a way, oh my God, like this thing has consumed me, literally consumed me for years, and I have missed out on so much. Now, life is precious, life is short, and we don't want to be spending our days counting calories, weighing ourselves, berating ourselves in the mirror, all the things. And, there is a much more enriching and vibrant life for you beyond the eating disorder, even if you can't see it yet. So imagine, your future self and what your future self would really value. Number 5, nostalgia. Nostalgic viewing of your thinner physiques on your iPhone's photo album is distorted reality. So don't let romantic and seductive fleeting notions distort the cold, weak half-life that you suffered in the pursuit of thin. Be radically honest with yourself about the very real cost of restriction. Do you genuinely wish to return to this? Okay, so I've talked about this before. You'll be at the crossroads again and again and again and again, where you're very seduced by going back down the eating disorder road, and you're going to have to make the decision again and again and again when you don't really feel like it, to do the thing, to do the step towards recovery. Okay, so just be aware, really, in a way. Be compassionate with yourself. Almost you've got to see it a bit like limerence, where we might kind of have limerence, where we sort of fantasize about a romantic relationship where we're obsessed with someone, but actually they don't even know who we are, but we kind of have this whole fantasy in our head about what this person means to us. And I think we can be a bit limerent, if there's such a thing, about our eating disorder. You know, we can like fantasize, idealize it, put it on this pedestal, and really that's all fluff. It's not real. Okay, so just recognize it for what it is. You're going to do it. You're going to like be seduced, but recognize it for what it is. Number 6, pros of the eating disorder. So really reflect on the pros, the benefits of your eating disorder. How has it helped you cope? Have there been life stresses in the background? Look at your self-esteem, be honest with yourself. How could you cope in healthier and happier ways? And I've talked about this earlier really when I talked about ambivalence. But you're resourceful, you're resilient. You can find alternative methods to manage things differently. So, you know, just have the faith that that can happen. And number 7, the quote by Lewis Carroll, which says, "In the end, we only regret the chances we didn't take, relationships we're afraid to have, and the decisions we waited too long to make. So be brave, you can do it." And I'm going to repeat the quote again. Lewis Carroll said, "In the end, we only regret the chances we didn't take, relationships we're afraid to have, and the decisions we waited too long to make." Okay, so just remember that every day that your eating disorder takes over and rules your life, you know, it's going to be a grief for the long term of days, memories, things lost. Okay, and however stuck you're feeling right now, recovery is possible. Just think about taking the next step. Don't look at the top of Everest. Just think about, how am I going to take the next step in front of me? Okay, you can do it. Okay, many people have walked this path before, and you can walk it too. Okay, thank you so much for listening today. Hope you enjoyed the episode. If not following me already on Instagram, do seek me out at the Eating Disorder Therapist _. And for further support with your relationship with food, do go to the eatingdisordertherapist.co.uk. And if you enjoyed this podcast, I would be so grateful if you'd follow, rate and review, as it helps it reach so many more listeners. Thank you so much for listening. And I look forward to sharing another podcast episode with you very soon.